Hi everyone, and welcome to Make Believe Storytime's mini story series, in which each adventure is inspired by the roll of the story dice. My name is Beatrice, and today's story, Rashid's Wish, will be read to you by actor and producer Andreea Helen David. We're super excited and also very grateful to have her as a guest reader here at Make Believe Storytime. If you'd like to keep in touch with her, you can do so at the link or handle which you can find in the description box below. Now sit back, relax, and get ready for our adventure.
Once upon a time, there was a boy called Rashid who lived with his father and 5 older brothers. Rashid looked at his brothers and thought, I want to be like them. They had all done well in school and had important office jobs. His father told him that working in an office didn't make a person clever or important. You're a practical person, Rashid's father said. You will find a career working with your hands, I am sure of it. One day, after struggling through another difficult language lesson, Rashid hurled his French dictionary into the ornamental wishing well outside reception. He was astonished to hear it splash into water. He had always assumed it was full of pebbles and dirt. People usually throw pennies into a wishing well, but I suppose the word for penny is somewhere in that book, so it might work. Rashid spun around to find Mrs. Hart, the school's headmistress, smiling up at him. She was a petite woman who radiated all the warmth and gusto her name might suggest. Well, go on then. Make a wish. There wasn't a hint of a joke in her voice. I wish, Rashid faltered. He couldn't remember the word clever and didn't want to say smart in case the wishing well thought he wanted a nice new suit. Mrs. Hart's eyebrows went up a notch in expectation. I wish I was strong, mentally. I wish I had a strong mind. He cringed. Excellent, Mrs. Hart said. She turned and walked back to her office. Rashid sighed and looked up to the sky in disbelief. The last few students were disappearing out of the gates as he walked across the courtyard. 2 enormous stone pillars stood either side of the school entrance. They were more than a metre thick, but today the pillars to his right bore an archway with a stone staircase beyond. Rashid looked around. The warm yellow light still shone out of the reception, but besides that the place was empty. After the strange moment of the wishing well, Rashid felt that he had no choice but to do as the world was telling him. So he followed the staircase down into the dim chamber lit by a handful of candles. Thief! The man shouted, and Rashid caught sight of something hurling towards him. He threw his hands up in defence, but the object never made contact. Cautiously, he peered out from behind his raised hands and stared at the heavy clay mug, hovering in the air close to his open palms. Sorcery, whispered a terrified voice. Please, Rashid said, I'm not a thief. He lowered his hands slightly and the clay mug moved with them. Rashid gasped and pulled his hands to his chest, closing them into fists. The mug dropped onto the floor and smashed. The man fled from the chamber. Rashid's thoughts swam. Levitation? The well had given him levitation? Quickly, Rashid focused his attention on a plate on the table. Nothing happened. He held his hand up to the plate, then he moved his arm up. The plate flew up with such force it smashed on the ceiling. Shouting somewhere in the distance, they would find him soon. Control, he thought to himself and breathed out slowly. He looked to a set of weighing scales. There were 5 apples in one dish and 2 in the other. Rashid carefully held out his hand and ever so slightly raised his index finger. The tray bearing 5 apples floated gently upwards and the scales appeared to balance. Rashid smiled. He jumped up in the air, but landed heavily a moment later. Up, he commanded, and threw his arm up in the air. He went nowhere. It clearly didn't work on people. Before he was able to use his newfound gift, the door crashed open and 2 guards landed on top of him. He was carried and dragged and jostled and eventually dropped onto the cold floor. A gate clung shut behind him and a key was turned in the lock. A toothless old jailer peered through the bars of his cell and snorted. Don't look like no sorcerer to me. Rashid rubbed his hands where the guards had held him. That's because I'm not. Wouldn't matter if you was. You'll never find the way out of here. He spat on the floor and then sauntered off. The way out? He whispered. Not any way out. The way out. Rashid got up and moved to the corner of his cell. Then one by one he worked his way across the room, lifting and dropping each flagstone in turn with a flick of his finger. Nothing. He stepped aside and lifted the flagstone he had been standing on. Beneath it was a short drop into a narrow tunnel. Word of a sorcerer had spread, and there was a commotion working its way up the staircase. Rashid summoned a candle from the wall and dropped into the tunnel. He ran as quickly as he could, then suddenly stumbled onto the courtyard. A shout went up behind him, and the drawbridge ahead began to rise. Rashid ran for the bridge, but he was rising too fast. He would never make it. He looked at the guard working the winch. He held out his hand and flung his arm up. The guard's helmet was whipped from his head, knocking the arm free of the winch. With nothing to hold it in place, the wheel spun free and the drawbridge crashed onto the ground. Rashid ran to it. As he drew level with the enormous pillars the other side of the moat, he saw to his astonishment an archway, just like the one he had passed through. He turned and ran straight into it, tumbling onto the tarmac in front of the school. He leapt to his feet, expecting the worst, but the archway was gone. His French dictionary lay on the floor. Rashid held out his hand to it and raised his arm. Nothing happened. He looked down in disbelief at his open hands. "Have you lost something?" Mrs. Hart asked, picking up the dictionary and handing it to him. "Only the one tool that set me apart," he said. "It's not the tools that set us apart, but how we use them," she replied.
And that was it, everyone. We really hope you enjoyed this story. It's really funny how words can mean different things, isn't it? Was it the well that showed Rashid he was clever? Or do you think Mrs. Hart had a hand in it? For this story, we rolled 6 story dice, and the images we got were a castle, a person making something levitate, a strong person, some scales, some secret stairs, and a trapdoor. Now I really wonder, what secret power would you have asked for? And what would the rules be? Why don't you make up a story and tell it to your adult? And remember to follow Make Believe Storytime on Facebook, Instagram and YouTube for free colouring pages, more activity suggestions and of course storytelling videos. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. I'll see you all next time.